I knew I had won the battle when Sandra stormed onto my property, eyes bulging, voice screeching like a siren, waving an official-looking HOA complaint. But let me rewind a bit because this war didn't start with a simple piece of paper. No, it began with something much more ridiculous. It all started when I decided to plant a garden. Not a wild, chaotic jungle, not some overgrown disaster, just a neat, well-maintained garden full of colorful flowers and homegrown vegetables. A peaceful hobby. But peace? That's not something Sandra allows in this neighborhood. The first time she confronted me, it was over something absurd. "Your sunflowers are too tall," she snapped, pointing at the golden blooms swaying gently in the breeze. "They disrupt the symmetry of the neighborhood." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Then she complained about my tomatoes, claiming they attracted too many birds. Next, the unruly vines offended her sense of order. The woman had a problem with nature itself. At first, I tried to be reasonable. I smiled, nodded, and even trimmed a few plants just to keep the peace. But Sandra? She wasn't satisfied. Oh no, she escalated. She went full Sandra. The next thing I knew, I had an official HOA complaint taped to my front door. Unauthorized modifications to landscaping. That's what they called it. And the cherry on top? A ridiculous demand that I return my yard to a uniform suburban aesthetic. That was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with just a difficult neighbor. I was dealing with a tyrant. That's when the idea struck me. A beautifully evil, brilliantly petty idea. If Sandra wanted to complain about my garden so much, I'd give her something truly unforgettable. Something she would regret for the rest of her life. Enter the corpse flower, the world's stinkiest, most notoriously disgusting-smelling plant. A flower so putrid it mimics the scent of a decaying animal just to attract pollinators. And I was about to plant it right under Sandra's window. The plan was risky. It takes years for a corpse flower to bloom. But I had an ace up my sleeve. Max, my next-door neighbor, an ex-botanist with a deep love for revenge-driven gardening. When I told him my plan, he nearly fell off his porch laughing. "You're really going for biological warfare? Huh?" He chuckled. "I like it. I'll help." Together, we ordered a rare corpse flower seed from a specialty greenhouse. It arrived in a small, inconspicuous package, like some top-secret government project. Planting it felt almost ceremonial, like I was preparing for battle. I chose the perfect spot, directly beneath Sandra's bedroom window, where the breeze would carry the flower's legendary stench right into her pristine, overly sanitized home. Of course, Sandra was already suspicious. She started lurking around, watching me through her curtains. One afternoon, she even dared to stand at the edge of my property, arms crossed, demanding to know what I was planting. "Oh, just a rare tropical plant," I said casually, barely containing my grin. She squinted at me like she could smell my intentions. But with no actual evidence of wrongdoing, she huffed and stomped back inside. The HOA naturally got involved. Sandra was relentless, filing complaint after complaint, each one more ridiculous than the last. Suspicious gardening activity. Potential environmental hazard. Possible illegal botanical experimentation. The HOA rep, a tired-looking woman named Lisa, showed up one afternoon, clipboard in hand. "Listen," she sighed. "Sandra won't stop complaining. Is there any way you could tone it down?" Tone it down? Oh no, I could not. Instead, I showed Lisa my completely legal gardening plans, complete with a breakdown of every plant I was growing. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, just one perfectly harmless, extremely smelly flower. Lisa, to her credit, tried not to laugh. "As long as it's legal, I can't force you to remove it," she said, giving me a knowing look. "But maybe don't tell Sandra that part." Sandra, however, wasn't backing down. She upped her game. One morning, I caught her peering over my fence, her phone out, clearly recording my backyard. "What exactly are you doing, Sandra?" I called out. She nearly dropped her phone in surprise. "I'm collecting evidence," she snapped. This whole thing is suspicious. You're violating community guidelines." I smirked. "Which guidelines exactly?" She sputtered, flipping through the HOA handbook as if she'd find some obscure rule about no mysterious plants that might cause psychological trauma. When she couldn't find anything, she huffed. "You'll see. I'm reporting you." It became a full-blown Cold War. Sandra installed security cameras facing my yard. I responded by planting taller bushes. She started posting passive-aggressive messages in the neighborhood group chat. I replied with overly polite gardening tips. The corpse flower, meanwhile, was growing steadily, waiting for its moment of glory. Then Sandra made her biggest mistake yet. She tried to get the city involved. One morning, a government inspector showed up, looking mildly confused. "We got a report of hazardous plant activity," he said, reading from his clipboard. I nearly laughed. "It's a garden." "Yeah, I figured," he muttered, glancing at Sandra, who was standing behind him, arms crossed, smug as ever. "That plant is dangerous," she shrieked. "It could be invasive, or poisonous, or toxic to the air." The inspector looked at my perfectly legal, well-maintained garden, then back at Sandra. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "it's a flower." "But it's a flower." He turned to me. "Sorry for the trouble. This isn't a violation of any law." Sandra's face turned an alarming shade of red as she watched her grand plan crumble before her eyes. I, on the other hand, smiled. The countdown had begun. In a few months, the flower would bloom. And when it did, Sandra would regret every complaint, every nasty look, every ridiculous HOA meeting she had dragged me into. And I would enjoy every second of it. The night the corpse flower finally bloomed, I knew victory had arrived. The first scream came from Sandra's house. I turned just in time to see her burst out of her front door, gagging, waving her hands frantically in front of her nose. "What is that?" she shrieked. Max, sipping coffee on his porch, called out, "Must be nature, Sandra." Sandra turned, eyes landing on me. "You," she bellowed, pointing an accusatory finger. "You did this." I shrugged. "Did what?" "Grow a perfectly legal, rare flower." She doubled over, dry heaving. The smell was unlike anything else, thick, pungent, and absolutely inescapable. It clung to the air, worming its way into houses, clothes, and every breath people took. And as Sandra ran back inside, slamming her door shut, I knew I had won.